A maid like you should know her place." Those words fell on the luxurious wedding space like a sharp knife, causing the noisy room to suddenly fall silent. The black girl, who was hired to clean and serve, said nothing, just stood there, her eyes not lowering. The groom's fiancé and future mother-in-law waited for an apology, a proper kneeling. But what they received was a heavy silence. A silence loud enough to bury a $100,000 wedding. Because there are things people cannot continue to endure, even as an invisible person. And that day, they forced her to become the epicenter of an earthquake they did not expect. A billionaire's knees buckle at an airport magazine stand. Walter Brent stands frozen in Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport, his executive briefcase slipping from trembling fingers. The glossy Forbes magazine cover stares back at him like a ghost from his buried past. Two striking faces, unmistakably familiar yet painfully distant, dominate the front page. The Carter twins. Black excellence, billion-dollar impact, the bold headline declares beneath their confident smiles. The 56-year-old CEO of Brent Global feels his vision blur. 28 years of carefully constructed walls crumble in an instant. His legs give out, sending his 6-foot frame crashing into a display of business journals. Magazines scatter across the polished airport floor like fallen leaves. "Sir? Sir, are you okay?" A gate agent rushes over, her voice cutting through the terminal's ambient noise. Other travelers gather, phones already emerging from pockets. Someone shouts about calling 911. A businessman loosens Walter's tie, checking for signs of cardiac arrest. But Walter's heart isn't failing. It's breaking. The twins' eyes seem to follow him even as paramedics arrive, their expressions holding secrets that could destroy everything he's built. The past has finally caught up with America's most untouchable CEO. Walter Brent commands an empire from the 92nd floor of his Manhattan fortress, where floor-to-ceiling windows frame the city he's conquered. The penthouse screams success in every carefully curated detail. Italian marble, museum-quality art, and silence so profound it echoes with loneliness. At 56, he survived 2 messy divorces that cost him $40 million combined, but couldn't touch his core fortune. The financial tabloids call him untouchable. The society pages whisper he's unmarriageable. Both assessments suit him fine. His corner office at Brent Global overlooks Central Park, where autumn leaves dance in patterns that remind him of another life. A life where a young black woman named Grace Allen painted dreams in watercolors and made him believe in something beyond quarterly earnings reports. She was an art student at Columbia when he was climbing the business school ladder, smart, passionate, unimpressed by his family's old money pedigree. She saw through his armor before he even knew he was wearing it. The pregnancy came during their final semester. Walter was 24, terrified, and drowning under family pressure that felt like concrete boots. His grandfather's voice still echoes in his memory. "You marry that girl, you lose everything. The trust fund, the company shares, your future, all of it." So he offered Grace money instead of marriage. Secret payments, legal documents, anything except his name. She tore up the check and walked out of his life, carrying his children and his cowardice with equal dignity. For 28 years, Walter convinced himself he'd dodged a bullet, built his fortune, married appropriate women, played the role his bloodline demanded. But 3 years ago, a single phone call shattered his carefully constructed narrative. Grace Allen was dead. Complications from diabetes, the private investigator reported. No surviving family except twin children. Adults now, successful, angry. The guilt hit like a freight train. Walter had never contacted them, never tried to find them, never even learned their names. His financial support had been filtered through lawyers and shell companies. Anonymous, cowardly, complete. Now he stares at his reflection in the darkened window, seeing a stranger in an expensive suit. The reflection doesn't show what he spent decades trying to forget, that he was once capable of love before fear taught him to choose power over people. His phone buzzes with urgent messages from his board of directors, but Walter ignores them all. The magazine still sits on his desk where his assistant placed it after the airport incident, the twins' faces haunting him with their mother's eyes. Grace's children have built everything he destroyed, and they know exactly who he is. Spring 1996 blooms across Columbia University's campus as Walter Brent strides through the quad with the confidence of someone born to inherit the world. At 24, he's already marked as the next generation of American business royalty, his surname carrying weight in boardrooms from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. But Grace Allen stops him dead in his tracks. She's painting near the library steps, her easel catching afternoon light that turns her dark skin luminous. Her brush moves with surgical precision, capturing the cherry blossoms in watercolor strokes that seem to breathe on canvas. Walter watches, mesmerized by the concentration etched across her features. "Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to ask me out?" she says, without looking up from her painting. Their first date stretches into sunrise. Grace talks about art that changes minds, policies that change lives, dreams bigger than profit margins. Walter finds himself confessing ambitions he's never spoken aloud, not the empire his family expects him to inherit, but the company he wants to build from nothing. "You don't need their money," Grace tells him over coffee in a 24-hour diner, her fingers intertwined with his. "You're brilliant enough to make your own." For 8 months they exist in a bubble where love trumps logic. Walter studies harder, driven by her belief in him. Grace paints portraits of a future where they build something beautiful together. He starts skipping family dinners, ignoring his grandfather's increasingly pointed questions about appropriate companionship. The pregnancy test changes everything. Grace holds the plastic stick with steady hands while Walter's world tilts off its axis. She's scared but resolute, already talking about names and nursery colors and how they'll manage school with twins on the way. "Twins run in my family," she says, laughing through tears. "Your children are going to be fighters, just like their mama." But Walter can't hear past the pounding in his skull. His phone buzzes with a text from his grandfather. "Family dinner tonight, mandatory." The Brent family estate in the Hamptons feels like a tribunal. Walter's grandfather, Harrison Brent III, sits at the head of a mahogany table that's hosted senators and Supreme Court justices. His father flanks one side, his uncle the other. All three men wear expressions carved from New England granite. "We know about the girl," Harrison says without preamble, "and we know about her condition." Walter's mouth goes dry. "How did you—" "Son, we've been watching you since you were born," his father interrupts. "Every friendship, every relationship, every choice. It's what families like ours do." Harrison leans forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow fills the cavernous room. "You want to marry a black girl? Fine. But understand what that means. No trust fund, no company shares, no seat at any table that matters. You'll be cut off completely, and your children will grow up knowing their father chose sentiment over success." The ultimatum hangs in the air like smoke from the fireplace. 3 generations of Brent wealth and influence, built on the backs of men who made hard choices when it mattered. "She's not some gold digger," Walter stammers. "Grace is brilliant, talented, and black," his uncle adds flatly. "In case you've forgotten what country you live in. Some barriers exist for a reason, Walter. Don't be naive." Walter drives back to Grace's apartment with his grandfather's words echoing in his skull. She's waiting with takeout Chinese food and dreams of baby cribs, completely unaware that he's already decided to destroy them both. The conversation lasts 7 minutes. Walter offers financial support through lawyers, medical coverage through shell companies, anything except acknowledgement. Grace listens without interruption, her face transforming from hope to understanding to something colder than winter. "Keep your blood money," she says, tearing the cashier's check into confetti. "My children will know their worth doesn't come from a coward's wallet." She's gone by morning, leaving only forwarding addresses with the registrar's office and a watercolor painting of cherry blossoms that Walter keeps for 28 years. He chose power over love, and now both his children are more powerful than he ever imagined. The Metropolitan Museum of Art transforms into a glittering battlefield for New York's annual Philanthropy Summit, where America's elite gather to showcase their charitable consciences alongside their designer gowns. Walter Brent arrives fashionably late, his black tie attire impeccable as always, but his mind still reeling from the magazine cover that's haunted him for weeks. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 500 of the city's most influential figures. Tech moguls mingle with oil heiresses, while senators shake hands with Supreme Court justices. Walter moves through the crowd like a shark in familiar waters, accepting nods of recognition and deflecting questions about his mysterious airport collapse with practiced charm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announces from the podium, "please welcome tonight's keynote speakers, the founders of Carter Impact Fund, Ava and Elijah Carter." Walter's champagne glass freezes halfway to his lips. Two figures stride onto the stage with the confidence of conquerors. The woman, Ava, commands attention in a midnight blue gown that speaks of understated wealth, her natural hair styled in an elegant crown. Beside her, Elijah cuts an imposing figure in a tailored tuxedo that rivals anything on Savile Row. But it's their faces that steal Walter's breath. Grace's eyes stare back at him from 28 years in the future. The same intelligent intensity, the same unwavering gaze that once made him believe he could be better than his bloodline. But there's something else. A sharpness inherited from somewhere deeper, more familiar. Walter sees his own jawline in Elijah's profile, his grandmother's high cheekbones in Ava's elegant features. The Brent family's aristocratic nose softened by Grace's warmth but unmistakably his. "Tonight we're here to talk about accountability," Ava begins, her voice carrying the kind of authority that fills boardrooms and commands respect. "About the systems that perpetuate inequality and the individuals who profit from maintaining the status quo." The crowd shifts uncomfortably. This isn't the usual feel-good charity rhetoric they're accustomed to hearing between wine courses. Elijah steps forward, his presence magnetic. "My sister and I built Carter Impact Fund on a simple principle. That privilege without responsibility is theft. That power without conscience is violence." Walter's hands begin to tremble. Around him, New York's power elite lean forward, sensing something electric in the air. "We know because we've lived it," Ava continues, her gaze sweeping the audience like a spotlight searching for truth. "We are the children of Grace Allen, a brilliant artist who died too young, too poor, too forgotten by a society that failed her." The temperature in the room drops 10 degrees. Walter feels every eye in the venue burning into his skin, though none of them know yet why this matters. "Grace Allen tried to contact a man for 28 years, Elijah says, his voice rising like thunder. "A man who promised to support his children but never had the courage to acknowledge them. A man who chose his reputation over his responsibility." Walter's chest constricts. The air feels thin, rarefied, poisonous. Ava's eyes find his in the crowd, locking onto his face with surgical precision. "And the man who denied us, who paid lawyers to keep us silent, who built walls to keep us distant, still holds a seat of power in this very room." The silence that follows could shatter glass. 500 of the most powerful people in America hold their collective breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Walter Brent," Ava says, her voice carrying across the cavernous space like a judgment from heaven. "CEO of Brent Global, father to children he's never met, coward who chose comfort over courage." Every head in the room turns toward Walter like synchronized dancers. He stands, frozen in the center of a circle that feels increasingly like a noose, his face pale under the museum's dramatic lighting. Elijah's voice cuts through the stunned silence. "We didn't come here for your money, Mr. Brent. We came here for something far more valuable, the truth." The crowd erupts in whispered conversations, phones discreetly emerging from purses and jacket pockets. Walter sees his carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble in real time, each shocked expression another nail in his professional coffin. But all he can focus on are the two faces on stage, faces that carry his DNA and Grace's dignity. Faces that inherited his ambition and her conscience. Faces that look nothing like him, and everything like the man he could have been. Ava steps closer to the microphone, her final words echoing through the museum like a benediction. Tonight, we're not asking for donations. We're demanding accountability from ourselves, from our institutions, and from the men who think power means never having to say you're sorry. The applause starts slowly, building into a thunderous ovation that feels more like a funeral march for Walter's reputation. He stands, paralyzed in the center of the storm, watching his children accept accolades for brilliance he helped create but never had the courage to claim. The hunter has become the hunted, and his own blood holds the smoking gun. Walter's corner office becomes a war room at 3 a.m, empty coffee cups scattered across his mahogany desk like casualties of his sleepless investigation. The city sparkles below, through floor-to-ceiling windows, but he hasn't looked up from his computer screen in hours. The internet age offers no mercy to men trying to escape their past. Ava Carter, Master of Public Policy, Harvard Kennedy School, he reads aloud to the empty room. Graduated summa cum laude, thesis on systemic wealth inequality in America. The irony tastes bitter in his mouth. Her LinkedIn profile reads like a resume designed to torture him specifically. Policy advisor to 3 senators, consultant for the World Bank, founder of Carter Impact Fund at age 26, with a portfolio worth $200 million and growing. But it's the photograph that stops his breath. Ava accepting an award from the NAACP, her smile radiant as she holds a crystal trophy. Behind her, barely visible in the background, hangs a watercolor painting of cherry blossoms that Walter recognizes with crushing certainty. Grace's painting, the one she left in her apartment 28 years ago. Elijah's profile proves equally devastating. Venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz, youngest partner in the firm's history. His portfolio includes 3 unicorn startups and a biotech company that just went public for $8 billion. Forbes named him to their 30 under 30 list 4 years running. Walter scrolls through interview after interview, where his son, discusses growing up in poverty, being raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs while earning her teaching degree at night. My mother taught us that success isn't about the money you inherit, Elijah says in a TED Talk that has 4 million views. It's about the impact you create with the resources you build yourself. The words feel like bullets fired across 28 years of silence. At dawn, Walter calls his most trusted private investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb, who's cleaned up messes for Fortune 500 CEOs and foreign dignitaries. Webb arrives within the hour, his expression grim after Walter explains the situation. I need everything, Walter says, his voice hoarse from hours of research. Education records, financial history, medical files if you can get them. And I need to know about Grace Allen, how she lived, how she died, whether she ever tried to contact me. Webb's investigation takes 3 weeks and costs $75,000. The report arrives in a manila envelope marked confidential that feels heavy enough to contain Walter's entire life. Grace Allen lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens for 18 years, working as a high school art teacher while raising twins who tested into gifted programs before they could spell their own names. She never married, never dated seriously, never spoke publicly about their father, except to tell her children they were worth more than any man's acknowledgement. But the most devastating revelation comes on page 47 of Webb's report. Grace had tried to contact Walter. Not once, but dozens of times over the years. Letters sent to Brent Global's corporate headquarters, returned unopened by his grandfather's personal secretary. Phone calls, routed to automated systems that promised callbacks that never came. Even a registered letter delivered to Walter's penthouse in 2010, intercepted by his doorman and filed away without his knowledge. Webb includes photocopies of everything. Grace's careful handwriting documenting Ava's acceptance to Harvard, Elijah's first business venture, report cards and school photos and soccer trophies. 28 years of a father's life, experienced through carbon copies of letters he never received. Your building's management company has strict instructions. Webb explains during their final meeting. Any correspondence not on your approved contact list gets filtered out automatically. The system's been in place since 1998. Walter remembers that year, his grandfather's final gift before dying, a comprehensive security protocol designed to protect the family from gold diggers and opportunists. He'd signed the paperwork without reading it, trusting Harrison Brent's wisdom one last time. The cruelest discovery comes in Grace's final attempt at contact. A certified letter, dated 3 months before her death. Webb's contacts at the Postal Service confirmed delivery to Walter's building. Signature obtained from the lobby security desk. Walter storms down to the basement archives of his apartment building, where packages and mail deemed non-essential get stored for 7 years before disposal. The storage manager, a nervous man named Rodriguez, leads him through rows of forgotten deliveries with the enthusiasm of a funeral director. They find it in box 743, between a decade-old fruit basket from a forgotten business associate and marketing materials for a political campaign Walter never supported. Grace's letter. His hands shake as he opens the envelope that's waited 3 years for this moment. Inside, her familiar handwriting fills 2 pages with words that rewrite his understanding of everything. Walter, it begins. This is my last attempt to reach you. Not from me. I stopped needing you 27 years ago. But our children deserve to know their father exists, even if he lacks the courage to know them. She writes about Ava's acceptance to graduate school, Elijah's first successful startup, about how they've built lives of meaning and impact despite growing up without child support, college funds, or the safety net his wealth could have provided. They're better than both of us, Grace concludes. Stronger than I ever was, smarter than you ever needed to be. But they're also your blood, Walter, and someday when you finally find the courage to face what you've done, I hope you'll understand that running from responsibility doesn't make it disappear. It just makes the reckoning more painful when it finally arrives. Walter reads the letter 17 times before the words stop blurring through his tears. Grace knew. She always knew that someday, somehow, the truth would find him, and she'd prepared their children for war. The twins hadn't stumbled into his life by accident. They'd been planning this confrontation for years. The address leads Walter to a modest brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a neighborhood that whispers old money without screaming new wealth. The building stands 4 stories tall, its red brick facade weathered by decades of Atlantic storms, but maintained with the kind of care that speaks to generational pride. Walter's Bentley looks obscene, parked between a teacher's Honda. He sits behind the wheel for 10 minutes, watching curtains flutter in upper-story windows, wondering if his children are watching him gather courage like loose change from his car's cup holders. The lobby smells like fresh paint and determination. No doorman, no marble floors, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Just clean lines, warm lighting, and a sense of home that Walter's penthouse has never achieved, despite costing 40 times more. Apartment 3B. Walter climbs 2 flights of stairs that feel like scaling Mount Everest, each step heavier than the last. His hand hovers over the brass knocker for 30 seconds before Ava's voice calls through the door. "We know you're there, Walter. The suspense isn't making this easier for anyone." The door opens to reveal Elijah in jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt that makes Walter's throat constrict. His son, and God, how strange that word feels even in his thoughts, stands 6'2", with the kind of lean strength that comes from regular exercise rather than personal trainers. "Come in," Elijah says, stepping aside with the courtesy of a man welcoming his executioner. "We've been expecting you." The apartment's interior defies every assumption Walter's made about his children's lives. Exposed brick walls display original artwork that probably costs more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves hold volumes on economics, philosophy, and art history in 3 languages. A Steinway baby grand piano dominates one corner, sheet music scattered across its surface suggesting recent use. But it's the photographs that stop Walter's heart. Grace's face smiles from frames scattered throughout the living room. Grace at college graduation. Grace teaching a classroom full of eager students. Grace hiking through mountains Walter never knew she'd climbed, painting landscapes he never saw her create. And in the center of it all, a formal portrait of the twins at their high school graduation. Grace stands between them in a dress Walter recognizes from their college days, her pride so radiant it seems to illuminate the entire photograph. "She kept everything," Ava says, watching Walter's face as he studies the shrine to a life he abandoned. "Every newspaper clipping about your company, every Forbes article about your success. She tracked your entire career like a researcher documenting a particularly interesting specimen." Walter turns to find both twins studying him with the intensity of scientists examining a virus under microscope. Ava sits in a leather chair that's clearly been arranged for maximum psychological impact, while Elijah leans against the piano with deceptive casualness. "She wanted us to understand exactly what we were up against," Elijah continues, his voice carrying his mother's intelligence wrapped in his father's authority. "So, when the time came to introduce ourselves, we'd be properly prepared." "Time came," Walter's voice cracks like a teenager's. "You planned this?" "Oh, Walter," Ava laughs, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "We've been planning this since we were 18 years old. Did you really think we'd stumble into your world by accident?" She reaches into a leather portfolio beside her chair and produces a digital recorder, placing it on the coffee table between them with theatrical precision. The red recording light blinks like a tiny heartbeat in the sudden silence. "Everything we say from this point forward becomes part of the permanent record," Ava announces. "Your choice whether that record includes denial, justification, or something resembling truth." Walter's mouth goes dry. "What do you want from me?" "We want you to face what you built," Elijah says, pushing away from the piano to pace the room like a caged predator. "And more importantly, who you erased in the process." "I'd never." "Brent Global's hiring practices, 1998 to 2015. Ava interrupts, consulting notes that suggest she's been preparing for this conversation longer than some people prepare for doctoral dissertations. 0 black executives above director level. Exactly 3 black board members in 27 years, all appointed after discrimination lawsuits that your legal team settled out of court." Walter feels sweat beading along his hairline despite the apartment's comfortable temperature. Those decisions weren't personal." "Of course not," Elijah says, his voice dripping with inherited sarcasm. "Just like denying your own children wasn't personal. Just like paying lawyers to intercept our mother's letters wasn't personal. I never told anyone to intercept your grandfather's security protocols." Ava cuts in smoothly. "Implemented in 1998, the same year Mama started trying to reach you. Funny coincidence, don't you think?" The room tilts around Walter like a ship in a storm. His children, his brilliant, terrifying, relentless children, have dissected his entire life with surgical precision. They know about decisions he'd forgotten making, policies he'd signed without reading, systems he'd inherited without questioning. "We spent 5 years researching you," Elijah says, settling into the chair opposite Walter with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. "Every business deal, every political donation, every charitable contribution designed to polish your reputation, while actual charity happened around you. You know what we discovered?" Ava leans forward, her mother's eyes boring into Walter's soul. "You're not evil, Walter. Evil would be simpler to understand. You're something worse. You're willfully unconscious. A man so committed to not seeing the consequences of his choices that you've built an entire life around sophisticated ignorance." Walter opens his mouth to defend himself, then closes it again. What defense exists against accuracy delivered with such clinical precision? "We don't want your money," Ava continues, her voice softening just enough to suggest that somewhere beneath the prosecutor lies a daughter who might have loved him under different circumstances. "Money can't resurrect our mother or restore the childhood you stole from us." "Then what?" "We want you to feel what Mama felt," Elijah says simply, "every day for 28 years. The isolation, the rejection, the slow realization that the person who should have protected you chose comfort over courage." The recording device continues its patient documentation, capturing every word for posterity. Walter realizes with growing horror that this isn't just a confrontation, it's a deposition, evidence being gathered for a trial he doesn't understand. This conversation leaves this room exactly once, Ava explains, as if reading his thoughts. In the form we choose, at the time we decide, delivered to the audience we select. Walter looks from face to face, seeing Grace's determination reflected in features that carry his DNA like a genetic indictment. His children have inherited the best of both parents and added something uniquely their own, a ruthless patience that transforms justice from an abstract concept into a lived experience. They didn't come to forgive him, they came to teach him what consequences taste like. The leather portfolio beside Ava's chair holds more than legal documents and research files. She reaches into its depths with the ceremony of a priest handling sacred relics, withdrawing an envelope so worn its edges have softened into silk. "Mama's final letter," she says, holding the envelope like a communion wafer. "Written 3 days before she died. Not to you, Walter. She'd given up on reaching you years earlier. This one was addressed to us." Walter's hands tremble as Ava places the envelope in his palm. The paper feels fragile enough to crumble at his touch, but Grace's handwriting remains bold and clear across the faded surface. "For Ava and Elijah. When the time comes." "Read it aloud," Elijah commands, his voice carrying the weight of 28 years of waiting. "Let Mama's words fill this room one more time." Walter's throat constricts as he unfolds pages that smell faintly of lavender and regret. Grace's familiar script covers every inch of cream-colored stationery, her final thoughts preserved in ink that hasn't faded despite 3 years in darkness. "My beautiful children," Walter begins, his voice barely above a whisper, "if you're reading this, then the time has finally come for reckoning. I've spent your entire lives preparing you for this moment, when you would finally face the man who gave you life but never had the courage to live it." The words feel like swallowing glass. Walter pauses, looking up to find both twins watching him with expressions carved from stone. "Continue," Ava says simply. "Walter Brent is not evil," Walter reads, his own name foreign in his mouth. "Evil requires intention, and Walter has spent his entire life avoiding intention, the way other people avoid disease. He is something more dangerous than evil. He is weak, and weakness, left unchecked, creates more damage than malice ever could." Elijah moves to stand behind his father's chair, close enough that Walter can hear his breathing. The proximity feels like a predator circling wounded prey. "He will tell you he was young, that he was pressured, that he was afraid." Grace's letter continues through Walter's halting voice. "All of these things are true, but they are explanations, not excuses. A man's character isn't defined by his circumstances. It's defined by his choices when circumstances become difficult." Walter's hands shake so violently the paper rustles like autumn leaves. Every word feels like a scalpel cutting away 28 years of carefully constructed justifications. I have watched him from a distance, building an empire on the foundation of our abandoned love. Celebrated for his business acumen, respected for his philanthropic gestures, admired for his ability to turn everything he touches into gold. But I have also seen what he refuses to acknowledge, that his success was built on the deliberate erasure of responsibility. "Stop," Walter whispers, but Ava's voice cuts through his protest like a blade, and keep reading, every word. "If you choose to confront him, and that choice must be yours alone, do not expect apology. Do not hope for redemption. Men like Walter Brent apologize only when cornered, and their redemption exists only in their own minds. What you can expect is recognition. For the first time in his life, Walter will be forced to see the full cost of his choices." Walter's voice breaks completely. Tears splash onto the paper, threatening to smudge ink that survived 3 years of waiting for this moment. "But here is what I need you to understand, my brilliant children," he manages to continue. "You were never broken by his absence. You were strengthened by it. You learned to build instead of inherit, to earn instead of expect, to value people over profits. In trying to erase you, he created something far more powerful than he ever imagined, children who cannot be bought, influenced, or destroyed. The apartment falls silent except for the sound of Walter's ragged breathing. Outside, Brooklyn continues its daily rhythm, oblivious to the reckoning unfolding in apartment 3B. If you ever find the courage to tell our children they were always worthy of your name, Ava reads the final lines from memory, her mother's words flowing through her voice like a river reaching the ocean. Then maybe you'll finally understand that worthiness was never yours to grant. Walter sets the letter on the coffee table with hands that feel disconnected from his body. The recording device continues its patient documentation, preserving Grace's final judgment for posterity. "She knew," he whispers. "She always knew you'd find me. She prepared us for everything," Elijah confirms, moving to stand beside his sister. "Your grandfather's security systems, your pattern of avoidance, even your inevitable attempt to buy your way out of accountability. We spent 15 years studying you, Walter," Ava adds, her voice carrying her mother's steel wrapped in silk. "Not because we needed your acknowledgement, but because we needed to understand exactly what kind of man abandons his own blood." Walter looks up to find himself surrounded by the ghosts of his choices. Grace's photographs watch from every surface. Her children's faces reflect his own features back at him, and her final letter lies between them like evidence in a trial he's already lost. "This was never about reconciliation," Ava continues, standing to pace the room with predatory grace. "This was about education, yours. Tonight you learn what consequences feel like when they finally catch up with cowardice." "What happens now?" Walter asks, though part of him already knows the answer. "Now?" Elijah's smile carries no warmth. "Now you discover whether 28 years of running has taught you anything about standing still." The recording device captures every word, every breath, every moment of reckoning that Grace Allen orchestrated from beyond the grave. Her children wait with the patience of people who've spent their entire lives preparing for this single conversation. She planned this too, Walter realizes with growing horror. The timing, the venue, even the words you're using. Grace choreographed her own posthumous revenge. "Not revenge," Ava corrects, her voice soft as a funeral prayer. "Justice. There's a difference, though men like you rarely understand it." Grace Allen's children weren't just demanding accountability, they were delivering it with surgical precision. Walter's penthouse feels like a mausoleum at 3 in the morning, 92 floors above a city that never stops moving, while his world has ground to a complete halt. The walls that once represented triumph now feel like a prison constructed from his own cowardice. Each expensive piece of art a monument to money that could never purchase the one thing he'd thrown away. Grace's diary sits open on his coffee table, its pages yellowed with age, but her handwriting still sharp enough to cut through 28 years of willful blindness. Ava had pressed it into his hands as he left their apartment, her final gift delivered with the clinical precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. "Day 112, Walter reads aloud to the empty room, his voice echoing off marble floors that suddenly feel obscene in their luxury. The twins asked about their father again today. Ava wants to know why he doesn't visit. Elijah asks if Daddy doesn't love them. I told them their father is very busy building important things, but someday he might remember that the most important things can't be built with money." Each entry feels like a blade sliding between his ribs. Grace documented everything. Middle-of-the-night fevers when she couldn't afford emergency room visits, parent-teacher conferences where she apologized for arriving late from her second job, Christmas mornings when handmade gifts tried to compensate for the absence of everything his wealth could have provided. Day 347, another entry begins, dated when the twins were 5 years old. Elijah drew a picture of our family today. 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. When I asked where Daddy was, he said, "Daddy lives in the rainbow so he can watch over us even when we can't see him." Children create such beautiful lies to protect themselves from ugly truths. Walter's fingers trace Grace's words like a blind man reading Braille, trying to absorb through touch what his eyes refused to fully process. She'd written about working 3 jobs while earning her teaching degree at night, about choosing between groceries and art supplies, about lying awake, calculating whether they could afford winter coats before the first snow fell. But it's the entries about him that destroy whatever remained of Walter's carefully constructed self-position. Day 1000-2022, reads an entry from the twins' 8th birthday, saw Walter on the cover of Business Week today. The golden boy of global commerce, they called him. I wondered if he ever thinks about the golden children he discarded. Ava has his eyes. Elijah has his stubborn chin. They both have his brilliance, but they're developing something he lost: conscience. The apartment's silence becomes oppressive, broken only by the sound of Walter's breathing and the occasional turn of a diary page. Central Park stretches below his windows like a dark ocean, but he can't see past the reflection of a stranger staring back from the glass. A 56-year-old man who'd spent decades running from a conversation that lasted 7 minutes. Day 2008. Grace writes, during the twins' high school graduation. Ava gave the valedictorian speech today. She talked about building bridges instead of walls, about choosing love over fear. I sat in the audience, thinking about a young man I once knew who was capable of such choices, before fear taught him to prefer walls to windows. Walter closes the diary and walks to his study, where floor-to-ceiling shelves display the trophies of his professional life. CEO of the Year awards, Philanthropist of the Decade plaques, honorary doctorates from universities that praised his business acumen while remaining ignorant of his personal failures. None of it means anything. 28 years of achievement built on a foundation of cowardice. Billions of dollars that couldn't buy back a single conversation with the children who'd inherited his ambition but rejected his weakness. Success measured in everything except the metrics that actually matter. He pours himself 3 fingers of whiskey, aged longer than his relationship with Grace, then sets the glass down untouched. Alcohol won't numb what he's feeling, the slow, grinding realization that he's lived his entire adult life as a fugitive from his own conscience. The worst part isn't the rejection. Grace was right about that, as she'd been right about everything else. The worst part is the silence that followed, the deliberate choice to never wonder, never ask, never care what happened to the lives he'd abandoned. His children grew up brilliant and angry and self-sufficient. But they'd grown up without a father. They'd learned to succeed without safety nets, to dream without inheritance, to build instead of inherit. Everything they'd accomplished was theirs alone, untainted by his money or influence or name. And they were better for it. Walter stares at his reflection in the study's darkened windows, seeing not the titan of industry the world celebrates, but the frightened 24-year-old who'd chosen comfort over courage and spent 3 decades convincing himself that cowardice could be transformed into wisdom through sufficient accumulation of wealth. What legacy, he whispers to his reflection. What's the point of building an empire if the only people who matter know you're too weak to deserve it? The realization hits like a physical blow. He'd spent 28 years building monuments to his own importance, while the people who carried his DNA built monuments to everything he'd failed to become. Grace Allen's greatest revenge wasn't exposing him. It was raising children who proved everything he could have been. Walter's resignation letter sits on the mahogany conference table like a suicide note written in corporate letterhead. The emergency board meeting he's called for 8 a.m. on a Monday morning has drawn every member of Brent Global's leadership into the same room where his grandfather once planned hostile takeovers and his father orchestrated political donations. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as Chief Executive Officer of Brent Global, Walter announces to 12 faces that register everything from shock to relief. My shares will be transferred to a blind trust, with voting rights assigned to an independent board of directors. Board member Patricia Hartwell, a woman who's known Walter since his Harvard days, leans forward with genuine concern. Walter, if this is about the incident at the philanthropy gala, we can manage the public relations aspects. This isn't about public relations, Walter interrupts, his voice carrying a certainty that's been absent for 28 years. This is about consequences. He doesn't mention the 2 certified letters delivered that morning, one to the Securities and Exchange Commission detailing Brent Global's hiring practices, another to the Department of Justice outlining what his legal team diplomatically calls historical compliance irregularities. Nor does he mention the 3rd letter, hand-delivered to a modest brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, containing bank routing numbers for accounts worth $47 million. The Grace Allen Foundation launches 6 weeks later with a press conference that redefines the concept of controlled demolition. Walter stands at the back of the room, silent as a pallbearer, while Ava and Elijah announce initiatives that systematically dismantle everything his grandfather's generation built their wealth upon. The foundation's mission is simple, Ava declares from behind a podium, bearing her mother's name in elegant script, to identify and eliminate the systemic barriers that prevent talented individuals from accessing opportunity based on economic status, racial identity, or family connections. Elijah steps forward, his presence commanding even without the expensive suits Walter once considered essential to projecting authority. We will focus specifically on supporting single mothers pursuing higher education, funding arts programs in underserved communities, and providing interest-free loans to minority-owned businesses. The assembled journalists scribble notes that will become tomorrow's headlines about redemption and corporate responsibility. But Walter knows better. This isn't redemption. Redemption suggests he deserves forgiveness he hasn't earned. This is accountability, pure and simple, administered by children who understand the difference between justice and revenge. 3 months later, Walter sits in the 4th row of a packed auditorium at Lincoln Center, watching his daughter command a stage that once hosted the world's greatest performers. The TEDx audience of 2,000 includes senators, Supreme Court justices, and tech moguls who hang on Ava's every word as she discusses the economics of abandonment. We study wealth inequality in America, Ava says, her voice carrying to the furthest balcony without amplification. We often focus on systemic issues: educational access, employment discrimination, housing policy. But we rarely examine the micro-abandonments that create macro problems. Walter's hands grip his program hard enough to leave fingerprints on the glossy paper. Around him, an audience of America's most powerful people nods along as his daughter dissects his life choices with surgical precision. A father who abandons his children doesn't just abandon those individuals, she continues, her mother's painting of cherry blossoms projected on the massive screen behind her. He abandons entire communities that lose the economic contribution, social innovation, and cultural richness those children might have generated with adequate support. Elijah joins her on stage, his presence transforming the presentation into a conversation between equals rather than a traditional lecture. My sister and I succeeded despite abandonment, not because of it. But success isn't the point. Contribution is. How many other children never get the chance to succeed because the people responsible for their welfare choose comfort over commitment? The standing ovation lasts 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Walter counts every second like a man measuring his own funeral. He doesn't applaud. He doesn't stand. He simply sits in silence, watching his children receive recognition for brilliance they developed in spite of him, rather than because of him. After the presentation, Walter approaches the stage where Ava and Elijah accept congratulations from admirers. He waits at the edge of the crowd, neither pushing forward nor retreating, simply making himself available for acknowledgement if they choose to grant it. Ava notices him first, her expression unreadable as she extracts herself from a conversation with a tech billionaire who wants to discuss collaboration opportunities. "Walter," she says simply, the use of his first name carrying more weight than any title ever could. "That was extraordinary," he manages, his voice thick with emotions he lacks names for. "Your mother would be proud." For the first time since their confrontation, Ava's expression softens almost imperceptibly. She always said that pride was something you earned, not something you inherited. Grace Allen's children had finally given him the only role he deserved: witness to their greatness. 6 months later, Walter sits in the last row of another auditorium, this one smaller, more intimate, filled with social workers and community organizers rather than billionaires and politicians. The Grace Allen Community Center's grand opening draws modest crowds, but massive hearts, exactly the kind of event Grace would have loved. Elijah stands at the podium, his mother's watercolor painting of cherry blossoms hanging behind him like a benediction, but it's his eyes that find Walter in the crowd, holding his gaze for just a moment longer than coincidence would allow. "Our mother left us many gifts," Elijah says, his voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. Her love for art, her commitment to justice, her belief that broken systems can be rebuilt by people brave enough to imagine something better. Walter's vision blurs as Ava joins her brother on stage, carrying a worn envelope that Walter recognizes with crushing familiarity. "But perhaps her greatest gift was this," Ava continues, unfolding pages that have been read so many times the creases have softened into silk. "A final letter, written not to us, but about us, about forgiveness." Her voice fills the small auditorium as she reads Grace's words aloud. "If one day their father finds the courage to face what he's done, let our children know that courage, however late it arrives, is still courage. Let them know. Their father once learned to face the truth." The silence that follows feels sacred. Walter's shoulders shake as 28 years of carefully controlled emotion finally breaks free, spilling down his cheeks in rivers that taste like salt and regret and something that might be hope. Around him, the audience sits frozen, witnessing something raw and real in a world that usually polishes pain until it's palatable. Walter doesn't try to stop the tears or compose himself or retreat into the dignity his wealth once provided. For the first time in his life, he simply sits with the truth that he failed, the truth that his children succeeded anyway, the truth that Grace Allen's love was strong enough to raise children who could forgive even what couldn't be forgotten. Ava's eyes find his across the crowded room, and for just a moment, Walter sees not his prosecutor but his daughter, not his judge but his blood, not Grace's avenger but Grace's greatest achievement. The air shimmers with possibility, not redemption, which he hasn't earned, but something smaller and more precious, the chance to finally stop running. Whether he takes it remains to be seen.